Okay. So, very good morning, doctors. I welcome you to once again AIOC. So, I would like to invite the chairperson, Dr. Manisha Nada, to proceed to the session. Over to you, Dr. Manisha Nada.
Thank you very much. At the very outset, I would like to welcome each and everybody who's there to attend our instruction course. And I would like to first introduce you what the topic, what the idea behind our instruction course is. We are going to talk on diabetic retinopathy. We all know it's a big problem which is emerging. And with a lot of equipment available to us, we should be able to treat the patients which are not yet getting treatment, like in the peripheries, and we should know the current concepts. What are the concepts in diabetic retinopathy? And we have the topics with us and eminent speakers and presenters here. So one by one, we will tell about our topics. So I start with my own topic first. So I share my screen. Am I audible and my slides are visible?
No, doctor.
You're audible, but your screen is not visible.
Do you want us to help you in this?
Sure. Let me know.
Okay. I'll try to connect a EV team to you. They'll help you out.
हेलो
Hello.
मैम क्या दिक्कत आ रही है इसमें?
मुझे तो स्क्रीन नजर आ रहा है, बट आई थिंक ऑडियंस आर नॉट।
नहीं, आपने शेयर कर रखा है मैम, शेयर नहीं हुआ ना अभी वहां से। आपका
तो इसको मैं
आपकी स्क्रीन होगी, वहां पे ग्रीन बटन आ रखा होगा, ग्रीन।
जस्ट वन
Near the taskbar, downside.
तो आपने जूम कर रखा लॉगिन, उसमें ग्रीन। Yes, ma'am.
Doctor, your screen is visible. Yes.
Full screen.
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you so much.
So we know that quantum of this disease, diabetic retinopathy, is very high, and we know and 1 in 3 people with diabetes have some type of diabetic retinopathy, and sooner or later 1 out of 10 will develop sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. It's a big social impact, and we all know that diabetic retinopathy, it's present in working age group. The bread earners, if they get in their family this diabetic retinopathy, then you know what can happen. Their life can be ruined because of this disease, because of the social and economic issues. So this is an important topic. The slides are not moving. Slides are not. Can you see the slide? Next slide. I can't. The slides are not moving. Can anybody tell me this?
I guess your screen has been stuck. Can you just reshare this?
Yeah, I have to. It's stuck up. The slides are stuck up. They're not moving. So can anyone tell me in the hall?
Excuse me, Dr. Manisha. Is it possible for you to share your contact details? Our AV team is trying to contact you. Yeah. Can you just please share it in your chat?
What number I supposed to tell you?
Your contact details, ma'am.
मैम स्किप करना है इसको. हेलो हेलो मनीषा मैम.
Yes.
मैम पहले प्रेजेंटेशन स्किप करना अपनी एक बार दोबारा से स्लाइड शो करो उसको. पहले स्लाइड शो कर दो उसके बाद शेयर स्क्रीन करना मैम.
I think the next speaker should come and talk on OCT, and I'll take the talk later.
Okay, ma'am.
The slides are stuck somehow. I'm escaping and still it is. So the next speaker is Dr. Chekitan Singh. He is a prolific phaco surgeon as well as a retina specialist, and he's director of Ishwar Eye Center, and he's going to speak on OCT in diabetic retinopathy. So Dr. Chekitan, please.
Yes, ma'am, I'm just sharing my screen. Can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Sorry, yeah. So good afternoon. I wish to thank Dr. Manisha ma'am and AIOS Scientific Committee for giving me an opportunity to speak my points of view on OCT in diabetic macular edema. So we have basic interpretations and we have advanced interpretations. We all know that how to read a OCT. There are various layers. This is the scan of a standard SD OCT by Zeiss. We all know the layers. So the question comes, when do I order an OCT? So once you order it, once you see visible macular edema, once you see presence of hard exudates at the macula, like you see these hard exudates whenever you examine an eye. So you order a OCT and you see how much is the edema, where are the hard exudates, and what is the configuration. Also, when your best corrected visual acuity is not coinciding with cataract density, that means the cataract is not equal to visual acuity decline, and there is a dull foveal reflex, that is the time you would order a OCT. Like in this particular patient, you just see a few hard exudates away from the fovea. And if you want to take him up for cataract surgery, it would be a good idea to do a OCT, and you will be surprised by the amount of edema this patient has, including a neurosensory detachment. So it is 409 microns. So that is bad news if you take him up for cataract surgery without taking care of the macular edema. Dull foveal reflex, as we have already discussed, even in the post-op patients, you can do that to assess treatment response, to document treatment failure, and to plan vitreoretinal surgery. This is an example of a patient who presented to me, had diabetic macular edema. So we gave him an injection, nicely responded with the first Avastin, did not respond with the second one, not with the third one. And you can see the macular edema is going up. And even with change of therapeutic switch to Razumab also did not help. So finally with Ozurdex, we were able to control him. This is 1 month post-op, post-injection picture. And you can see that the edema is already going down. Visual acuity is improving to 6.9. Another patient who came for cataract surgery had macular edema. We advised him, you can see the neurosensory detachment here, the hard exudates. Advised him control of macular edema and surgery, did not follow with us, got operated elsewhere. Presenting acuity to us was 618. Post-surgery, he came with 636 visual acuity. And you can see the hard exudates have progressed all over the macula and see the giant neurosensory detachment which is there. That is what happens when you do not control retinopathy and operate straight away. So we gave her multiple anti-VEGFs, worked partially. Then we finally gave her Ozurdex and we were able to dry the macula. But by that time, the foveal thickness has reduced to 124 and vision could not be improved beyond 6.9 parts. But the patient was much more satisfied. Again, a 70-year-old male, cataract both the eyes, said, I want to get operated. So I was seeing some suspicious areas in the left eye, did an angiography, found a NVE. and the protocol changed completely. In the right eye also, the foveal reflex was not very crisp. So when we did a OCT, we found a vitreomacular traction, and this eye went for a combined surgery. And this eye went for this other eye also had a broad attachment at the macula, at the fovea, but there was not much disturbance of the contour. So we just decided to do PRP, and 1 month later take him up. This was a patient who came for cataract surgery actually, but had a proliferative vitreoretinopathy, PDR. And when we did the OCT, this is where the OCT really helps you when you're not really sure what is happening at the macula. So you can see the taut posterior hyaloid phase and the vitreomacular traction, and you can see this is going towards formation of a hole. The thickness is already a lot. So this patient was not for cataract surgery. This patient was rather for vitreoretinal surgery, which he subsequently underwent. This is post surgery. This is under oil. So you can just see under gas. So you can just see a reflex, and you can see that all that retina which was pulled up has all settled down post-operatively. This is the other eye of the patient. So had cataract in this eye. This eye can be safely taken up. You can see the proliferative vitreoretinopathy after, of course, doing a nice photocoagulation. And this eye has a posterior hyaloid phase which is detached, and the macula is reasonably all right. Here also it highlights how segmentation errors can lead to false thickness, which is measured on OCT. OCT is measuring 1463 microns as the central thickness, which is wrong. It has taken this as the upper layer of the retina. So you have to be careful, look in detail, just don't depend on what the OCT shows you. You can also add color to your interpretations, especially the grayscale. I can see more of these hyperreflective foci much better on grayscale, and sometimes small amounts of fluid is better visualized than the color photos. This is a histopathological section. I do not find it of much use. Advanced interpretations, you have central retina thickness is given less, of course, is important, but drill is the new thing which is there. Disorganization of the retinal inner layers. You can see this is a 1 millimeter scan through the center. And you are seeing this particular eye on this side, you are able to see the layers much better. You know, each layer you can see separately. However, on this side, all the layers are mixed. So there is drill here. And they say if it is more than 500 microns, then the chances, it is a good predictor of visual acuity improvement post-treatment. So you can prognosticate your patients. Coming to hyperreflective foci, these are precursors to hard exudates. These are activated lymphocytes. That is what some of them say. They usually progress from the inner layers to the outer layers. And when they settle down on the outer layers, they usually cause disruption of the ISOS layer integrity. And also the external emitting membrane gets disrupted. And when they coalesce together, they form hard exudates, which you see here. You know, so these are the HRFs. So HRF coalesce together, form hard exudates. Also, the presence of hyperreflective foci in the outer retina is closely associated with the disturbed ALM ISOS line. You can just see this with the example. This patient was under my treatment. This is the picture 3 years back. You can see the absolutely intact ISOS layer with macular edema and hyperreflective foci, which are more towards the inner layers. However, 3 years later, he has had multiple anti-VEGFs and Ozurdex injections. You can see that these hyperreflective foci have coalesced together. So these are the hard exudates. And you can see even drill here. And you can see that these hyperreflective foci have migrated from the inner layers to the outer layers, which is again a poor prognostic sign. This was an interesting article, effect of initial management of versus anti-VEGF versus laser versus observation. And it said that if you have better than 6/9 vision, even with macula involved edema, which is moderate in this thing, you can follow up the patient rather than, straight away going for treatment. So don't treat the OCT, treat the patient. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Chekitan, for this wonderful talk of yours. I'm going to start mine. Start properly. I'll continue with that.
Do I need to stop sharing, or ma'am can share straight away?
I think you need to stop. I need to stop. You need to stop.
My option is only not coming. Yeah. Ma'am, can you share your screen?
Let me first open my.
Yes.
Can you see? Can you see the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you see this
Ma'am, yes.
and hear me also? So I would start that it's the diabetic retinopathy scenario in India and screening algorithms. We know that diabetes mellitus is a global pandemic now, and because of the increased urbanization, a lot of people were having bad lifestyles, resulting obesity, and with the non-nutritious food. In a country like ours, where the resources are poor, we people are getting lots and lots of prevalence of diabetes. So we know that every person who's with diabetes is having a risk of developing diabetic retinopathy. So 1 in 3 people are going to have diabetes, and out of that, 1 in 10 would develop sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. It has a big social impact. There are various risk factors where duration and heredity, they are the main ones. India is the second highest in number after China, and there is a study, meta-analysis of 41 studies on type 2 diabetes mellitus, and it shows that India has the highest prevalence, that is 28%. And if we see the ethnicities, India, as it is a nation country, it is 19.9%. A lot of work has been done on diabetic retinopathy, knowing the prevalence rates, and it's all done in the South India. There are very many studies, and they all show that the prevalence rates are around, like in this speech study, in the second report, it was said that diabetic retinopathy was prevalent in 1/3, and sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy in 1/5 of the people with type 2 diabetes mellitus. Here, this showed that the duration of diabetes was the main predictor. Then there are other studies done by a RAB survey by Dr. RP Center, AIMS, in 2015 to 19. They found that it is 16.9% prevalence of diabetic retinopathy. Another study is the GREEN study by Dr. Rajiv Raman et al. And they showed that diabetic retinopathy in a 4-year incidence, it is 9.2%, diabetic macular edema 2.6%, and the sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy is 5%. So this graph also shows that the study, and they found that in 2020 it was 47 million, and it is going to be 67.8 million diabetics in 2030. So they are all showing that there's a high prevalence rate in India, though it is less than what is shown in the Western countries. In America, it is something like 40%. So we need to do diabetic retinopathy screening. There are various principles. They were given in 1968, like Wilson and Jugner's principles. And the most important ones are the, which I have taken out of the 10 principles. They are the disease which is public health concern is important. It should be recognizable early or in the latent phase, and it should be well accepted. And the treatment options should be available for that particular disease. And it should be economically viable policy. Our diabetic retinopathy, it fulfills all. It detects the referable cases, and that needs timely referral is required. Ophthalmic examination can be done, and treatment can be done to avoid this permanent visual loss. So we have to treat at the grassroots levels. So this shows that sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy includes the severe NPDR, diabetic macular edema, and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And imaging is the most important factor when we do diabetic retinopathy screening. So what is this screening? Screening, it is the first step towards controlling blindness. It can be by screening the population identification. We know it is the sheer number of people which are increasing the prevalence rate. We need to have some screening tests. We have to do referral of the positive patients, make a good diagnosis, and do a prompt treatment of these positive patients. And continuously, we have to do a quality assurance at every step. We should know which patient is getting treatment or not getting treatment. So we know diabetic retinopathy, and we have to report the outcomes also. So in all these points, I would say that's highlighted ones. Here, the role of ophthalmologist comes into play. That is in the diagnosis and prompt treatment, and in reporting of the outcomes. Then there are various screening models have been described. They are the ophthalmologist-based models, ophthalmologist-led models, community-based screening models, or hospital-based screening models. Dr. Rajiv Raman has given his contribution on this in IGO in this year. So ophthalmologist-based models, they are based on indirect ophthalmoscopy and the retinal photographs. Then are the ophthalmologist-led models, where telescreening model is most important, and we involve the paramedical staff to take images. And a remote grading is done by graders. They can be doctors or they can be ophthalmologists or some trained people. Then are the community-based screening models. So they are done at the doorsteps. The patient does not come to you. We have to go do some camps there. They are outreach clinics. Different vans are made. One Nana, by name Nana in Karnataka, is a very famous one where exclusive DR camps are held, and these diabetologists and ophthalmologists, they play their part and diagnose people and refer those who need treatment. And in this reference, they also refer cataract and other eye-associated problems, not only diabetic retinopathy. So then is the opportunistic DR screening. So diabetic retinopathy screening can be done by physicians, diabetologists, and here in opportunistic DR screening, sometimes we need ophthalmologists. It can be done in clinics, lab, or pharmacies, wherever the patient goes. If he goes for his test for HbA1c or for any other blood sugar test, he can undergo this screening test. A technician can capture the retinal photograph and send it to the remote for diagnosis to the remote ophthalmologist. And these ophthalmologists, after consultation and with the help of AI, then tell us what is the report of the patient finally, and so we can start the treatment. So it is at the opportunistic side. Then opportunistic screening, what are the barriers? Sometimes it happens that the physicians who are doing this screening, this opportunistic screening, they don't know. They only know direct ophthalmoscopy, that not too very nicely. And they lack ophthalmoscope. Sometimes they don't have the training. We can train or educate people by giving them local pamphlets or show education videos, but education videos are better. So screening is also done in peripheral health centers. In India, it's very important because we have a network of peripheral health center, and where they train ophthalmic technicians, they do this screening, and pediatric screening is always better. So, but what is the barriers to compliance? We see that children, they don't come for screening purposes. Transport, if it is not available, if a person is having a good sight in one eye, or there is cost of care, patient is not having money, will not go for the DR screening. There is apprehension, what will happen if I go there, what machines will be used. So there is a scare. Sometimes it is apathy. Because of certain reasons, social reasons or whatever, the patient are not concerned about their sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. But there are certain facilitators to diabetic retinopathy screening. They are the travel assistants. If you give them vehicles, if you screen at a care facility which is close to their residence, or go for group discussions, and there are education videos. And if there is a fear of losing eyesight in the other eye, then they are very keen on getting the diabetic retinopathy screening done. And if you give free of cost, so they are very happy. People are happy getting it done. So one model of tele-screening program has been given. They say image acquisition should be done. Review the image, evaluate, patient care supervision is done. Image is then stored, and this data storage can be used as a metadata and can be used later. So these are various fundus cameras and smartphone photography. This is Google. People are also helping in these AI screening programs. There are various studies by these using deep learning algorithms, and also by smartphone photography using artificial intelligence. It is done. Another study by this JAMA Ophthalmology is also showing that Dr. Rajan has done on offline artificial intelligence. Diabetic retinopathy and artificial intelligence, it's a global health burden. And there are machine learning techniques also available by ANN, MCA, LLDP, and these are the various learning techniques, machine learning techniques. There are various algorithms given. They are the DR system for detecting referable diabetic retinopathy. There can be ret markers DR based on machine learning algorithms. There can be IR based on the smart fundus phone photography. This is a model. It's a standard model where the fundus camera, it detects pictures by electronic imaging. These are compared with the preset lesions, and a grader can grade these lesions, and with the library of pictures, it can be stored and the data can be used later. So this is a robust automated fundus grading. This is a swift grading of fundus images at the diabetes clinic and helps in instant referral of patients with diabetes. Conclusion is incidence of diabetic retinopathy is bound to rise with time, as we know that we have a very, very large diabetic population. Detection of sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy is important. It should be done well in time so that treatment is given. We need to work out logistics at national level to implement a robust screening program. The government should be enthusiastic about it. There should be good enthusiastic policies also, and it should be implemented and should be given to each and everyone who needs it. The diabetic screening, it's a need of the hour, I would say, and we need to expedite the huge worldwide drive for reducing the diabetic blindness through an integrated approach. We should not have any missing links, and which is a patient-centric. It should be patient-centric and is included in the public health system. We should have in our system how to screen. We are screening patients every day, but it's not a systematic screening. So we need to have good programs for that. So with this, I end my slides and say thank you to all. This is our college.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manisha. I would request you to call upon the next speaker. And there's one more reminder I would like to tell everyone that we are running a little bit short of time, as there was a technical glitch at the beginning. So I request all speakers to please keep the time on as per your. Okay.
So now I call upon the next speaker, Dr. Salil Gupta. He is having his own hospital, Saraswati Nethralaya Karnal, and is trained at Shankar Nethralaya. So Dr. Salil Gupta, please your talk.
Good afternoon, everybody. So fundus fluorescein angiography plays a very big role in the management of diabetic retinopathy. It helps us to do the staging, classification of the macular edema, planning treatment, follow-up and planning treatment in the recurrence and the recalcitrant DMEs. As we know, the staging of diabetic retinopathy depends upon the quantity and the number of the coordinates involved of the retina regarding to the retinal hemorrhage, cotton wool spot, heart exudates, microaneurysms, irmas, venous bleeding, capillary non-perfusion areas, and neovascularization. On angiogram, the retinal hemorrhages, cotton wool spots, and the vitreous hemorrhage would give hypofluorescence or the block fluorescence. So the microaneurysms and the dot hemorrhages, they look similar as red dots. So, but on FFA, the microaneurysms will be bright hyperfluorescent dots on early venous phase, and they remain hyperfluorescent in the late phase and may show the leakage, differentiating into them from the dot hemorrhages. The irmas are the intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. They present dilated capillaries and collateral channels. Now, they can be differentiated from the NVE, from the NVDs. As you can see in the inset of the angiogram, we have a NVD, and the NVDs, they leak in from mid to the late phase, whereas the irmas, which are along the arcades, they don't leak. So this is how you can differentiate between the irmas and the NVDs or the NVDs over the angiogram. Then another finding is of the venous bleeding. These represent the localized variation in the venous caliber. The inset picture shows a very nicely bleeding appearance of a vessel. Now, NVEs or the NVDs on angiogram, they fill up in a very early phase, and in the late phase, they leak very profusely. If the neovessels are over the disc or within the 1 disc diameter, you label them as NVDs. Otherwise, elsewhere, they are called as NVEs. Angiographically, the diabetic macular edema has been classified into focal and diffuse. The focal leak is from the microaneurysms, very discrete mannerisms, which will leak in the late phase, whereas the diffuse macular edema is from the capillary leak, and it is very well shown in the later phase of the angiogram. Coming to the macular ischemia, now the normal FZ, as we know, is surrounded by a very fine network of vessels, and the central part shows a hyperfluorescence. But when the ischemia sets in, now this is a picture of very supple ischemia. Here, FZ is slightly enlarged, it's slightly distorted. But see the end, the vessels end abruptly, and you have some polypoid-like endings of these vessels. This is a very supple ischemia which has set in the patient. It can be more, and sometimes because of the poor circulation, the macular ischemia could be a part of the larger capillary non-perfusion area of the retina. Now, how the angiogram helps in planning the treatment. Now, this is a case 1. The patient had very discrete microaneurysms on the angiogram. So such a patient can be easily be treated by a very focal laser to the microaneurysms. Now, this patient had succinates which were slightly away from the center of the macula. And such a patient can easily be treated with a modified grid laser. This patient has focal as well as diffuse maculopathy. We have mechanisms in the early phase, and in the late phase, you can see the leaky mechanisms and a diffuse leakage. Such patient definitely would require an anti-VEGF followed by a grid treatment. This patient came with a very acute visual loss, and on an angiogram, it showed a very petaloid pattern into the representing a cystoid macular edema. Now, such a patient would require an intravitreal steroid. Here, the patient shows a lot of NVEs, NVDs, and along with that, you can see discretely leaking microorganisms. So, such a patient would require a PRP with a grid and a good metabolic control. Now, this is a patient who had already undergone PRP, and patient came after a few years with a decrease in vision. Now, on an angiogram, we could see that the patient is having a diffuse maculopathy. Along with that, some recurrent NVEs. Now, this patient would require an anti-VEGF or steroid or both, and followed by a PRP augmentation. So, this patient clinically looked to have a lot of, it seemed that the patient was having NVD, and the margins were very blurred. And on an angiogram, we could find out that the patient was having diabetic papillopathy. And along with that, there was a diffuse maculopathy. The prognosis in such a case is poor, and one has to plan for Ozodrex. Now, this patient shows a very featureless retina. And on an angiogram, the patient showed an extensive 360-degree scapulae non-perfusion areas, though there was no NVDs or NVEs. So this is a high-risk patient and needs a PRP to prevent the patient going into neovascularization. So there are so many situations where the angiogram itself, you can decide whether you would go for only laser or anti-VEGF. And these are special situations where the patient, we can help us to differentiate the patient from whether the patient is suffering from diabetic retinopathy or what. Now, this patient had pseudophakia, and the patient presented with cystoid macular edema. And after an angiogram, we could easily pinpoint that this patient was suffering from pseudophakia related to the cystoid macular edema related to pseudophakia, not because of the diabetic retinopathy. Now, there's a situation where the patient had a lot of asteroid halosis, and it was difficult to assess the retina. An angiogram clearly showed a very extensive NVE, very extensive proliferation of the vessels, and the patient did require a lot of laser treatment. Again, the angiogram is very helpful in differentiating between AION and diabetic papillopathy. In diabetic papillopathy, the FFA will show a very early disc leakage, which will increase throughout the study. Well, this patient had already undergone a PRP, and here the angiogram helped us to pick up these NVEs, which we could not see clinically, and the patient was treated accordingly. On the last slide, this patient had already undergone a focal laser and came down with a loss of vision after a few days, and the patient had developed CNVM. Now, this patient had to undergo an anti-VEGF treatment. So at the end, I would say angiogram helps us in managing a diabetic retinopathy case at each and every step. And with the OCT, it goes in hand to treat the patient. Thank you so much.
Dr. Salil,
Yes, ma'am.
experience with other dyes? Are you doing ICG or something like that? ICG.
No, I don't have ICG. I think after the OCT, ICG is slightly out. I think better would be that if I am able to upgrade later on, I would like to go for an OCTA rather than going for ICG.
Very nice. And how about peripheral NVEs and the plaques at the macula? If there is a plaque at the macula with this focal leaks, how do you interpret your FFA?
No, definitely that will be seen. As I said, OCT is an integral part, and the clinical acumen is, again, you have to, it is not just the angiogram which will help you to guide. It is all the things together. So if you have a plaque in the center, you can see it. So you have to go for Ozidrex or something in such patients. So, and as far as the peripheral neovascular is concerned, then probably you will have to bend your camera, try to take pictures, or invest more, go for a wide field angiogram.
Right.
So,
Dr. Chekitan, your comments?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Chekitan, would you like to say something on FFA here?
Yes, ma'am. Angiography is a integral part of management of diabetic retinopathy. So where we suspect NV, where there are IRMAs, and where the disease is looking more a stage higher than what you think it is. So you can always do angiography. Although of course it is now limited these days to ruling out macular ischemia.
Yeah.
In vascular occlusions and in diabetic retinopathy, and in
OCT
finding
has
out
come.
silent
Yeah.
NVs, yes.
Yes.
And rather the newer thing now is wide field angiography, where you can find peripheral NVs, and if you treat that,
Yeah.
they say even macular, it helps in treatment of macular edema as well.
Yeah,
So that is
for
something
the
which is on the newer
persistence,
side.
if there is edema is persistence, then we have to have this optos or wide field
Yes, ma'am.
or at least 200 degrees. I know. And so next speaker is Dr. Jitendra. Dr. Jitendra Phogat. I hope he's joined. Dr. Jitendra. He's going to speak on lasers in diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Jitendra.
जी मैम
He is working as VA surgeon at Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, and he's going to talk on lasers in diabetic retinopathy, which is very important topic. So Dr. Jitendra, you can start, please.
I'm just starting.
सर राइट हैंड साइड बॉटम नीचे सर नहीं
It's okay.
Okay.
Basically, what are the treatment modality of diabetic retinopathy? Include anti-VEGF drugs, intraocular steroids, and lasers. The different type of lasers we used are the focal laser, reed laser, PRP, Pascal laser, threshold, and navigated lasers. Laser photocoagulation has been the mainstay of diabetic retinopathy since its development in mid-20th century. With the advent of intraocular steroids and anti-VEGF therapy, role of laser therapy is reduced in current scenario. PRP reduce retinal ischemia and hypoxia to anoxia and thus decrease expression of VEGF. It is recommended in PDR, and there are benefits of early PRP. Other factors are poor compliance, impending cataract, or poor status of the fellow eye, which determine the timing of PRP. The various indications are NVD with pre-retinal hemorrhage or VH, NVE with pre-retinal or vitreous hemorrhage, paralysis of iris or angle, signs of extensive retinal ischemia, severe PDR in other eye approaching a high-risk PDR, pregnancy or post-renal transplantation PDR, and non-compliant patient with very severe MPDR. These are some pictures showing NVD more than 1/3 disc area, NVD plus hemorrhage plus NVE more than 1/2 disc area. What we have to discuss with the patient are the basically numerous follow-up visit required. He may need supplementary laser treatment. Definitely PRP reduce the risk of vision loss and blindness in the long term, but there may be risk of vitreous hemorrhage during PRP procedure, and which may require supplement laser therapy later on. The side effects include usually it's reduced peripheral and night vision, and also the contrast sensitivity. And this side effect we have to discuss with the patient prior to the start the PRP. The lenses are the 3-mirror Goldman contact lens, which have a disadvantage of small field of vision, which require continuous manipulation of the lens to complete the treatment. And the wide angle contact lens, they have advantage of we need minimum orientation and the laser can be completed in a single sitting. The laser spot size has to be adjusted according to the different lenses required. The most common wavelength are the argon green, blue green, and 530. In an AG media, krypton red or diode red laser may be used. These are the setting of 200 to 500 micrometer power, 200 to 250, and one weight apart. A goal, basically, the power is gradually increased. A total of more than 2,000 burns are required in 3 sittings. Macular area has to be avoided, and also the detection elevation of the retina. The burns are placed 2 to 3 disc diameter away from the center of the macula and 1 disc diameter away from the disc. Laser treatment should avoid major artery veins, peritoneal hemorrhage, choroidal scars, and absolutely not within the 500 microns of the fovea to avoid the risk of hemorrhage or large scotoma post laser. These are a picture of limited PRP, and in the right picture, more extensive treatment. This is pre-treatment, and after 3 months, when the new vessels have decreased, there is residual fibrosis. These are the basic complications. Mainly intranet, we have macular edema, which usually subside after a few months. And the late are the night blindness, reduced contrast, reduced visual fields, PVD induction, and intermittent focal burns can cause permanent visual field defects. In a targeting, we can laser only the specific non-oscularized area. And then for the CME, we use the focal laser, which remove the unhealthy RP cells and more RP cells which absorb more fluid from the macular edema. This is a mechanism, parameters, and the lens is used. Complications of the local laser are the center scotoma, and CNVM is a non-complication. Then the modified grid also. And the last is the Pascal. We use these are the Pascal picture. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jitendra, for this very nice presentation.
Actually, I have some less time, so I would just went very speedily through this.
It's fine. Do you, Dr. Chekitan? Dr. Chekitan, please. Can you hear? So what about this sub-threshold lasers? Dr. Chekitan, Dr. Khanduja, what is your experience regarding this? Are you using those?
No, ma'am. I don't have access to this.
Okay, what is the consensus regarding using these as they are coming, like in Western world? They say it's very popular. People are using these sub-threshold lasers. So what is your view regarding this?
Maybe,
in India, is it?
Yeah. But I don't have an access. But with the advent of anti-VEGF and steroids,
they remain the mainstay.
Yeah, except for focal laser, I'm not. I've actually stopped doing macular laser grid photocoagulation. So
absolutely not.
Except for focal leaks.
But if there is a plaque of fibrosis there and your anti-VEGFs are not working,
process, any intervention actually doesn't help a lot, except for
But if there's a close by focal leak is there, then
beg your pardon.
If there's a close focal leak is there, just close to that plaque. So then you need to do sometimes,
500 microns, you can go actually into this thing area. Up till 500 microns, you can laser, provided you're careful that
But what about your PDR peripheral neovascularizations? Then you need to do lasers.
Peripheral yes. Ma'am, just
you cannot.
No. I think you've not understood me. I said I'm not doing macular lasers.
That is better. Yeah, anti-VEGFs can be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we need to do lasers. PRP, there is an NV.
For macular edema, except for focal leaks, I'm not. Previously we were doing grid photocoagulation. That's a practice that I have discontinued.
With all due to respect, sorry, Dr. Manisha, but can we just call upon the next speaker as we have three more speakers to go and we have to wind up till 1:25.
Yeah, thank you so much for reminding. I would like
Yeah.
Dr. Aruj to be there. Dr. Aruj Khurana.
I think Dr.
He's
Aruj is
going to.
not.
Is he not? Is he there?
No, ma'am.
No.
So then we have Dr. Sumit Khanduja, who's heading the Karnal Medical College, the eye department of Karnal Medical College, and is a wonderful VR surgeon. And I think his talk is going to be super. Let's see what he tells. Dr. Khanduja.
Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity and also for giving me the task of, for everyone rather, for discussing diabetes management in 6 minutes, diabetic retinopathy management. So, ma'am, I'll be sharing some of my videos and my own experiences regarding surgical management of diabetic retinopathy. So, grossly in a practice, the indications of surgical intervention are non-resolving vitreous hemorrhage. The classical definition used to be 3 months, but with the advent of better systems, nobody waits till 3 months. It's month and a half, and it totally depends upon the surgeon and the patient's understanding. Then tight, ma'am, submacular, premacular subhyaloid bleeds, tractional detachments which are involving or threatening to involve the macula, combined detachments, and ILM peeling in cases of non-resolving macular edema. This is the investigational therapy. So, ma'am, starting with the most of the cases, these are like subhyaloid hemorrhages. Diabetes, lends us with a beautiful advantage that if the bleed happens in the subhyaloid space, it achieves quite what we want to do, that it causes, posterior vitreous separation. So in this case, we have removed most of the blood, and there is some, blood which is deposited on the retina, which is actually, removed with the use of proportional reflux. So these are simple cases. Not very challenging. The retina is lasered pre-operatively well, and these are the cases we generally want to operate, and we are happy operating them. Okay, so this was a case when the patient had a tight subhyaloid bleed, and I actually messed up thinking that would be very simple. So again, if you know that in diabetes, the vitreous is very peculiar and something not common as you see in other diseases. It's something called a taut posterior hyaloid. So what I thought that would be, a case I would be able to finish it up early. I wasn't able to induce the PVD, kept trying very hard, tried over the lesion, over the disc, and finally, I was able to achieve some separation. But then it came at the cost of, inducing more bleed, because there was a neovascularization below, and I had already triggered a bleed, and now the whole scenario looked much worse than it started off pre-operatively. So here you see I'm still struggling to lift up the posterior hyaloid, catching it wherever I can near the disc, on over the lesion, but wasn't coming up well. So as it progressed, yes, it did happen, but what I was left was with some clots on the macula. I was able to clear it up, but if you see carefully what had happened, I had actually induced a break near a vessel, and which was now bleeding profusely. This is a situation where you have kind of lost the game. You can't laser these lesions. If you try to elevate the bottle height, you will eventually control the bleed, but that comes at the risk of causing an ischemic optic neuropathy. So this was one case where of a tight subhyaloid bleed, which I actually missed. The next, these are the two most common done procedures. One is delamination and segmentation, and most of them, they are done hand in hand. Now, what does delamination mean? Delaminate means to peel off the surfaces. So if you understand that this is a large neovascular front growing along the arcades, there are two layers. One is of the fibrovascular proliferation, and second is the retina. You have to separate them very gently. You can do it with the forceps, but now with the advent of these low gauge cutters, where the tip is very close, the port is very close to the tip, we can actually separate them with the help of the cutter. And you have to remember that when you're separating two tissues, The larger tissue is the one which will be left back, and smaller tissue, the more friable tissue tears off. So you have to be very careful. So after you have separated, now we are cutting in between these two islands. This is one hook from where the fibrovascular proliferation is getting its vascular supply. This is the second. So we are actually cutting and we are creating two separate islands, which is called as segmentation, and we are doing with the help of vitrectomy cutters. So now this was another case of segmentation and delamination. So this is a large front, the fibrovascular front, which is, actually the fibrovascular front arising at the disc is actually tenting up the fovea. So I have introduced my cutter between the optic nerve and the fovea, and gently trying to lift it with the help of the cutter, and trying to, it looks kind of when I look back my surgeries in the retrospect, I feel that sometimes I was a little gross in my intervention. So, but the only thing I was trying was to not to avoid creating a macular hole, and at the same time being able to cut off the traction on the fovea and let it fall back. So eventually I could, and see, I have cut out across the fovea, and there is a small island of tissue which is now on the fovea, and the rest of it has got fallen back. The fovea has fallen back. So this is the most commonly done step of delamination and segmentation. Now next, coming to en bloc removal, very popular with surgeons who do not have much of a patience and there's a large tissue. You just hold the proliferation and remove it in total. So this was by one of my teachers who used to say that I will not, I will not be hesitant in creating a break, but I will remove all the traction. So see, he aggressively he pulls up on the fibrovascular proliferation and the posterior hyaloid, and which in turn makes this tractional detachment become a rhegmatogenous. So you just see there are two breaks that have already formed up here, and another springs up here.
With all due respect, Dr. Sumit, I'm so sorry, but I guess it's time up. If we just want to
Okay,
have a
for a
simple
minute.
open
I
interaction.
think he can continue, I think, because one speaker is not there, so he can continue for a while.
Okay,
Okay,
ma'am,
we
I'll
have
go back
hardly
to the minute.
5 minutes to go. Okay, fine. You
Okay.
can continue. You can sum up within the next 30 seconds.
I
Hope
think
you
that's
can.
the last
Yes,
round.
yes.
So this is the last, ma'am, that we do sometimes in patients who have. So this was the patient who had a tractional detachment. So we have cut the fibrovascular front, but what you see is actually there are ILM striae which is pulling traction on the macula, and this arises from the inferior neovascular, the NVE. So these are the patients I consider that you see ILM striae can be taken up for ILM peeling, and which actually results in the loosening of traction on the macula. So just my last slide is that for those people that normally we put triamcinolone acetonide on the retina with the help of a syringe and a needle. Here what we do is that we suck in the tricot through the cutter and then use a proportional reflux to inject tricot on the retina. This has been described by my friend Dr. Raju, and the same it can be done for dye ILM staining. So the lessons that I've learned practically are that preoperative anti-VEGF is important as it reduces intraoperative bleed, and diabetic vitrectomies in type 1 diabetics are the toughest, and many of them have to be abandoned. And the third is that never lose watch over the optic nerve, especially when you are delaminating or you're doing segmenting. Diabetic disc, they've got very poor perfusion pressure. That has happened that you have done a very good segmentation delamination but lost the optic nerve. Then in those patients, when you have to use a silicone oil,
Sum up, Dr.
always
Thanduja, sum up please, first.
and
Because we have another speaker.
yeah.
One more.
So the last is that you treat the patient and not the retina. And the surgeries that look great in conferences necessarily don't have a very happy post-op outcome. Thank you so much.
So now next speaker is Dr. Neeraj Sandhuja. Dr. Neeraj Sandhuja is working as the director of Vian Eye Center at Gurugram and has been a great VR surgeon. Shankar Netralaya was his school of learning. So Dr. Neeraj, please. He's going to talk on recent advances in diabetic retinopathy. Yeah, he's there. Dr. Neeraj?
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Please,
Manisha.
yeah. Yeah.
I hope my slides are visible.
Yes.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'll be speaking on some recent advances in diabetic retinopathy. Everything has been well covered by Dr. Sumit in terms of good vitreoretinal surgical techniques, uh, artificial intelligence, and other things. So I'll be just touching upon few of the latest things which are happening in the field of vitreoretina, especially in diabetic retinopathy. And it will be revolving around artificial intelligence and new investigative modalities, OCT angiography, wide field FFA, multifocal ERG, microperimetry, and new treatment modalities in terms of anti-VEGF and steroid injections. As far as the artificial intelligence in diabetic retinopathy is concerned, because we have very less trained manpower or to see the quantum of diabetic patients suffering from diabetic retinopathy, so we need to evolve some system where this mass scale screening can be done. So artificial intelligence is playing a big role in that. DXDR is the first FDA-approved artificial intelligence for the detection of diabetic retinopathy in non-ophthalmic healthcare practitioners. This device is paired with the non-mydriatic retinal camera, and images are captured and sent to a cloud-based server. Then the server utilizes some software, which is a deep learning based on human experiences fed into the computer, and then the images, and then it detects whether any diabetic retinopathy is mild or severe, if it is there or not. If it is mild, then it is more than mild, then it is referred to healthcare professional. If it is less than mild, then rescreening is advised at 6 to 12 months period. But as far as the sensitivity and specificity is concerned, it is almost around 85 to 90%. So you're likely to miss some patients also, which may not be detected on this software. So, but it is a big boon. And increasing application of artificial intelligence with deep learning will facilitate in telemedicine reaching up to the rural area. And we are talking about some new modalities. OCT angiography has become as a non-invasive kind of angiography in terms of detection of macular ischemia, edema, vessel wall length caliber, and how good is the vascular architecture. So everything can be detected well with OCT angiography, and it is as good as angiography, but it has got certain limitations also. If you look at this OCT angiography picture, you can see the macular ischemia, which you may or may not be able to pick on angiography, and you can see finely delineated microaneurysms also. So all these things can be picked in a non-invasive manner by OCT angiography. But the field of view is very less. Earlier it was 3 by 3 mm, but now with the new machines coming up to 8 by 8 millimeters field of view is visible. Also, another shortcoming is we are not able to detect whether any leakage, vessel wall leakage is there or not, which you detect on angiography. And some motion artifacts also come with OCT angiography. Another modality, ultra wide field imaging in diabetic retinopathy, the capillary ischemia, which you are not able to pick on the conventional your photography, where you see up to the 60 degree of the field, you are able to see up to the 120 degree or 150 degree with this wide field imaging with diabetic retinopathy. As far as microperimetry and ERG is concerned, multifocal ERG and microperimetry detects diabetic retinopathy in early stages, and I think it is likely to change your way of looking at the disease in terms of what was given by DRS and ETDRS classification. So with these evolving techniques, we may be able to pick up the disease at early stage and treat accordingly. Subthreshold laser delivery was being discussed earlier also. Basically, here what we are doing, we are just doing the photostimulation of RP to decrease the retinal edema and release some angiogenic factors to decrease the macular edema. And several laser manufacturers have providing subthreshold laser by pulse laser endpoint management. So this is, and Navalis is another system where you are just demarcate the area of the laser to be treated, and the machine does all the things, and it is not, you're not dependent on the human delivery system, and it is much faster and more predictable. And in therapeutic advances in diabetic retinopathy, we have seen that 50% of DME patients, they have still persistent diabetic macular edema at the end of 1 year of anti-VEGF treatment. So we need to look into newer therapies where we can overcome these challenges. And protocol are showed like, because so many companies come, they say NSAIDs you use and it reduces the diabetic macular edema, reduces number of injections. But I think it is not true. Injections have to be given. There is no difference in visual outcome. And various non-biodegradable polymeric drug delivery systems in terms of Illumin and Retisert have been available, where implant gives a steroid delivery up to 3 years. Even encapsulated cell technology, the Nexus devices has come, which delivers the competent RP cell lines to deliver antibodies. And ODTX is on-demand therapeutic implant, which is a rod where multiple reservoirs of drugs are available, and it is being stimulated by a laser. So this is what. Another new molecule is betamethasone containing D, and the ranibizumab containing microspheres for a longer delivery. They are in the stage. And the encapsulated liposomes are available, which will change the scenario of this. And another iTrack microcatheter and nivation intravitreal implants are available, which may deliver disease up to 2 years. So to conclude, new imaging techniques and the ability to identify and quantify various aspects of diabetic and pharmacotherapy is coming in a big way. Our strategies to treat the patient with lesser number of injections and more permanent treatment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, for this excellent talk on recent advances. We have learned a lot from you today. And now I think it's time and we have to wind up. I would say that diabetic retinopathy is a very, very important condition which we have discussed today with all the modalities of its treatment, but anti-VEGFs could not be covered. So in short, I would say for all the diabetic macular edemas, we use anti-VEGFs as of now. And in such cases where it is non-responding, we go for Ozurdex or steroids. And in peripheral cases, if there is a peripheral NVE or PDR, we use lasers in whatever if we have to use. And in cases there is a non-responding DME, then we can go for vitrectomy also with ILM removal. And any comments from you, Neeraj, or anyone else from?
I guess it's 1:30.
Everything has been well covered.
Yeah.
Wonderful session. And
Yeah. I'm thankful to all of you, Dr. Sumit Khanduja, Dr. Chekitan, Dr. Jitendra, Dr. Neeraj, for your excellent, wonderful talks and having your bright thoughts here. It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manisha, for chairing this session, and all to the renowned speakers to be ending it